Priests and other pastoral ministers to embark on the way of empathy for those who are going to serve the church in ministry. This begins with the formation that they receive in seminaries. But academic learning is never sufficient. It is never enough simply to have academic learning, because empathy is not something that is learned simply from books. Empathy is learned from reflection, from meditation, from contemplation. Empathy is learned from encountering people. Empathy is learned also from literature and the arts. Think, for example, the poets, how poets can sensitize us so that we become more empathetic. Poets such as Karol Wojtyła, read his poetry, filled with empathy. Czesław Miłosz, read his poetry, filled with empathy. It is these authors who enable us to recognize and to resonate with and to appreciate the depth of suffering that so many human beings face in our time. Now, the exhortation has caused some controversy because the Holy Father seems to leave open the door for some divorced and remarried Catholics to receive the sacraments of reconciliation and Eucharist. This is seen by some as a threat to the Church's doctrine of the indissolubility of marriage. I suggest, however, that this is in accord with a centuries-old tradition of applying doctrines with a pastoral sensitivity born of empathy. Over the centuries, the Church has taken her teachings and applied them to her ministers with compassion, with empathy, with recognition of what you might say with a pastoral realism. An example is the principle of integrity in confession. The Council of Trent placed an anathema on those who would affirm that it is not necessary by divine law to confess each and all mortal sins, as also the circumstances that change the species of a sin. In other words, it is by divine law, the Council teaches, that a penitent must confess all mortal sins, number and kind. Over the centuries, however, moral theologians and canonists have recognized with pastoral realism that this principle cannot always be observed. They have described situations of physical and moral impossibility, restricting the ability of the penitent to confess all mortal sins. Examples of physical impossibility would be soldiers rushing into battle or persons with beginnings of dementia. The most common example of moral impossibility would be a person who suffers from scrupulosity, in which case the confessor would insist on only a generic confession of sin. A principle declared by the Council of Trent to be of divine law is applied with pastoral sensitivity. And therefore, I suggest that when the Pope leaves open the door in some particular situations where a couple that is divorced or married might receive the sacraments, that he is simply following in the tradition of the Church and with the consensus of all the bishops who are gathered at the synod. And so we have a pastoral principle, or we have a doctrine rather, that in specific cases, again, I don't think they're going to be that common, but nevertheless in some specific cases are applied with pastoral sensitivity because of empathy for the people who are in those situations. In the exhortation, the Pope, following the final report of the 2015 Synod, quotes the Catechism of the Catholic Church in recognizing that responsibility for an action can be diminished or even nullified by ignorance, inadvertence, duress, fear, habit, inordinate attachments, and other psychological social factors. This comes from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. In other words, this is a pastoral realism. People are limited. Many people are limited in what they can do. Many people are limited in terms of the decisions they make in conscience because of so many different factors, such as ignorance, inadvertence, duress, fear, habit, and so on. It's a pastoral realism. Many Christians are hindered from achieving an ever more faithful following of Christ because of the factors mentioned above. Some struggle, others give up, but all must be treated with empathy. There has been criticism that the Pope and some bishops are no longer upholding the demands of the gospel in the ardent pursuit of virtue, especially chastity. It is an unfair criticism, especially in the light of the Pope's relentless demands for authentic Christian living in his preaching. As we know, his daily homilies are a great source of examination of conscience for all of us.